The first strategy is one of the most popular ones that many of you will have used and everyone has encountered. The idea is to keep all of your best teams for offense with the exception of one very strong team on defense. The hope is then that this strong team will trip up your opponent at least once, and as long as you can then one-shot your opponent's board, you should be able to win on banner efficiency, as long as you don't drop too many banners on all of the battles that you're doing. Now, a quick note on the darker and lighter red and blue dots that you see here on the map, as you'll see these throughout the video series. The lighter ones indicate weaker teams that any balanced board would have multiple counters for. The darker ones indicate stronger teams that a balanced board would only have one or maybe two reasonable options for. So don't get hung up on the technicalities of what exact ranking a team has. What you care about is how many other teams can counter this in a reasonable way for good banners, and that's what you should be focusing on. So remember, dark dots mean strong, light dots mean weaker. Now back to the strategy. A lot of players like this heavy offense strategy because it gives them a lot of control over the match, and they generally score high banners even if they lose. Some people set two of their strongest teams on defense rather than one, but still go very offense heavy for the rest and expect to one-shot everything, so this works more or less the same. Now the requirements for this strategy are, first of all, that you must be 100% certain that your opponent can't one-shot this specific defensive team. This means that you really need to know which teams can counter which, and what the conditions are for those counters to work, so that you can check if your opponent has them. There are lots of unusual counters most people have never heard of, so while you're yelling at your guildmates that a cheater beat you, they perhaps use something you simply didn't know about. If you don't believe that, then just a reminder that under the right circumstances, Rey Jedi Training can beat a Jedi Knight Revan team, Emperor Palpatine can beat Padme, and Night Sisters can beat Darth Revan with Malak, to give you some examples. If you don't know those circumstances, then you don't know what to look for, and you can't be certain that your opponent won't beat your team in one shot. The second requirement is that your other defensive teams should not be so weak that they can be undersized. If your teams are not strong enough, your opponent will score too many banners on them, and even if they fail once on that strongest team, they may still end up with more banners than you. To illustrate that, let's take this example in Division 1 or 2, where you have to place 8 defensive teams and each zone you take is worth 180 banners. This is assuming a scenario without chips. Now if your opponent gets 40 banners against your strongest team because they fail once, but an average of 61 banners on your other 7 teams, then they end up with 1907 banners. Now if you do your 8 fights but you get an average of 58 banners because you fought a lot of strong teams, then you would actually only end up at 1904 banners and lose the match. It's pretty incredible, but it's possible to lose the match even if you didn't make any mistakes, but your opponent did. So keep that in mind. Now a really important question that comes up for this strategy is where to place this strongest defensive team in your map. And there are two options for this. Option 1 is to set it in the front. If you're certain that your opponent can't beat your team, then you have absolutely nothing to hide. If your defensive team is the current top meta team, then you should probably set it in the front zone to block your opponent from clearing an additional zone. Now if you're on a map with a fleet zone included as well, then you want to set your strongest team in the zone that is not in front of fleets. The reason is that people usually want to open that bottom zone up first, so that they can see all of the remaining ground teams, so they can decide where exactly they want to spend all of their counters. Now they have to commit to your strongest team to beat that first in order to open everything else up, and thus they won't be able to get an easy view of what to expect of the map. Now it's also entirely possible that you simply have a fleet that your opponent can one-shot, because they never care too much about fleets. So in that case, that can be the team that they have to two-shot as well, and then your ground teams don't even need to be particularly strong. Now option number 2 is to set the team behind another team that draws out characters or counters that could still make it possible for your opponent to one-shot your strongest team. I will get more into this in strategy number 8. Now there's one more tip I want to give you for offense. If you use this strategy, then you assume that you will one-shot your opponent's board. Now sometimes due to counters failing or making mistakes, this won't be the case and you may have to clean something up. Now if the team you have to clean up is one of your strongest teams, then you can leave it be to give your opponent the impression that you can't clear them. So then they either lower their guard assuming that they don't really need to try very hard to beat you, and they might make mistakes. Or they become very paranoid about the strength of your back wall, and they try to go too light in the front to save a lot for the back. And perhaps that's where they will make mistakes as well. Now, this tactic won't work on everyone. There are plenty of smart players who will absolutely see this coming, but sometimes it could make the difference. Now, in conclusion, this strategy can lead to very easy wins if your opponent has no counters to your team. If you want to win all of your Grand Arenas, however, then don't use this strategy against opponents who have an answer to all of your teams. Especially the more experienced players will very often know what they're doing and have all kinds of ways to deal with any setup that you come up with. So be careful when going this light on defense, as it might end up hurting you. So leave your thoughts on this strategy in the comments below. I'm sure many of you have used this many times or fought it many times, but it would still be interesting to hear how you feel about it. Make sure to subscribe for more Grand Arena strategy videos, and let's move on to the second strategy.